was in junior high school, we had a school program where we had a magician, supposedly a hypnotist, and he, during the presentation, asked for some volunteers, and so 3 of us went up on a stage, and he was talking and trying to hypnotize us, and talking to the audience and waving the pocket watch back and forth in front of us. And out of the corner of my eye, I could see him very surreptitiously, with a couple of fingers, inching the wallet out of the back pocket of the boy next to me. And he palmed it and put it into his pocket, and then told us to go sit down, and then revealed that he had the wallet. Obviously misdirection. He was creating all of this stuff out here for people to listen to and for people to watch, when really what he was doing was something else. Classic misdirection. Jesus was a master of misdirection. You look at his stories, the parables are replete with setting up one set of expectations and coming out somewhere else. Coming out somewhere else. The story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus is talking with a culture that is steeped in Judaism and the law. And the question comes, well, who is my neighbor? And these folks are used to thinking in terms of hierarchy and good folks and bad folks, and the story involves a priest and a rabbi and a Samaritan who is a foreigner of a suspect religion. Misdirection, because it's the Samaritan who ends up being the neighbor. The story of the prodigal son. The prodigal son who against all the laws of Judaism, abandons his father, takes his inheritance, and runs off, spends it all, ends up being the one in the end who is welcomed back into the fold. And the older son who stayed home and done everything right is kind of left on the outside. Classic cases of misdirection used in the teaching. Powerful stuff. It's a technique that can be used for powerful teaching. It is also, unfortunately, a technique that is commonly used by scoundrels. Bernie Madoff, but probably the biggest thief, that has been officially caught and put in prison, was a master at misdirection. He set up all of this wonderful stuff, charities and wealth, and he had all of these relationships. And everybody said, Bernie couldn't be a crook. Except a few people who looked at the numbers and said, this is impossible, Bernie's a crook. But nobody would listen to them because he had such wonderful smoke and mirrors, and he had the you got profit. Look at the money. Look at the money you can get. Oh, isn't the money great? And it was all going into his pocket. Classic thief using misdirection. It's used by the con artists, the magician, the advertising world. You want to be healthy, young, and sexy? Buy this car. But what I want to focus on this morning is what I think is a deeply moral issue that involves misdirection being used in our national life by politicians of both sides of the spectrum. Talking about our economics. How boring, economics. Numbers. Oh no. Who wants to think about numbers? Well, it has real implications. Implications that affect the lives of hundreds of millions of people in very concrete ways. The discussion around the economy. You hear this voice that says, we're broke, folks. We're broke. We don't have any money. We have to cut the spending. We're spending too much. The deficit is destructive to our national life. And you know what? On space is true. We're spending more than we take in as a country. We're creating a deficit. It's true that if we continue building a deficit, it will erode our ability to have any kind of discretionary spending for programs. You know, on space, that's all true. But let's look at it a little deeper. You know, let's consider issues of justice and issues of fairness. I mean, if I drive 10,000 miles a year on the state's roads, and someone else drives 500,000 miles a year on the state's roads, is it fair for me to pay the whole bill to maintain the roads? If I make $50,000 a year, which I don't, and my neighbor makes $50 million a year, should I pay more than my neighbor for using the same economic and judicial and educational and physical infrastructures? I mean, everybody uses the economic, legal, and utility infrastructures that have been created through our history. Should those who profit the most pay less than those who benefit the least? Is that just? Consider. Just think of how much you paid in federal taxes last year. Think of how much you paid in federal taxes. Now, consider that in 2010, the latest figures that I could find, General Electric Corporation paid 0 federal taxes on profit of $26 billion. Bank of America paid 0 federal taxes on profit of $4 billion. Citigroup paid nothing on profit of $4 billion. Boeing paid minus 0.1%, that's minus 0.1% on profit of $4.3 billion. Ford paid minus 1.7% on profit of $6.6 billion. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, corporate flacks claim that the U.S. has the highest corporate tax rate in the world. How can we tax the corporations more? And on its face, that is true. Highest corporate tax rate in the world. Unfortunately, if you look at it, the effective tax rate is somewhat different. In fact, it's more than somewhat different. It's a lot different. What matters is not just the official tax rate, but the effective tax rate, what people actually pay. I mean, what is actually paid is a lot less. Essentially, through shuffling papers on the world stage, multinational corporations are able to dodge taxes in the places where goods and services are produced and consumed. And they ship them to mailboxes in the Cayman Islands and Bahamas, where there is no corporate income tax. This has had the result that the multinational Coca-Cola Company, one of the biggest corporations in the world, had an effective tax rate of 6.6%. I'd love to have a 6.6% tax rate. Yahoo had a negative 9.6% rate. DuPont Chemical had a negative 11.5% rate. If we look at Google, between 2007 and 2009, Google cut its taxes by almost $4 billion. And the way that it did this is by doing this arcane kind of trick called transfer pricing, where they set up a subsidiary in Ireland, which has a very low tax rate, put a lot of their services coming out of Ireland, but then that tax rate was too high, so they shifted that to the Bahamas, which has no corporate tax rate. It was all on paper. And according to our laws, it's legal. The question is it just? Is it fair? See, this isn't just an academic question. This isn't just a question of taxes. It's not political. This is a deeply moral question because it has very real, concrete results, impacts on people. Politicians cry poverty and say, we have no choice but to cut services. Services is a nice euphemism. Because really what they are saying is we have no choice but to kill people. And if you talk with some of the guys who were downstairs these past 2 weeks, you would see the concrete effect. In 2011, there was this huge budget cut that Congress and the President agreed to, $38 billion. Low-income housing assistance was cut $390 million. Community health centers were cut $600 million. Federal emergency management was cut by almost $1 billion. Clean drinking water was cut by almost $1 billion. These aren't just academic kinds of actions. These are actions that adversely affect real human beings, and real human beings living in our community. Just ask how long somebody who is poor and disabled has to wait for subsidized housing in Grand Junction. Talk to Marillac Clinic about how difficult it is to provide services and how much they depend on St. Mary's to even be in existence. It has concrete concrete effects on real human beings and real lives. You know, the most disingenuous conversation I find is the conversation about cutting Medicaid and Medicare. The same people who were decrying the so-called death panels under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, you know, Obamacare, those same people are the ones who now speak of rationing end-of-life care for the elderly. Oh, but that's not a death panel. That's just what we can afford. Anyway, I'm sure most of you are aware of these kinds of discrepancies in the national conversation. The question is, what does spirituality have to do with this? What does it have to do with who it is that we are being spiritual beings in the real world? And one of the things that I was to suggest is that the whole history of the Judeo-Christian tradition is one that has never been an ivory tower kind of spirituality. At its base, it has been a spirituality that has sought to have the rubber meet the road. The prophets of the Old Testament had a spirituality that was grounded in their inner experience and knowledge of the ultimate. And then they found an expression of that in their advocacy for the poor and the widow, the orphan and the sojourner. The characteristic element of the prophets was their strident call to responsibility to their culture. Their insistence that doing justice was the measure of compassion and the measure of a close walk with God. I mean, if we look at Jesus as a model, we can see that he maintained this kind of dual focus. Jesus would retreat to the mountains for times of spiritual intimacy with the ultimate. But then he would return to the valleys and return to his work with the people. And in his ultimate act, Jesus went to Jerusalem, where he confronted the powers of the state and the injustices that they promulgated on the people of Israel. When Jesus cleared the temple, this wasn't just a religious act. He was taking on the powers of the state. He was taking a stand for justice, for those considered the least deserving by the existing hierarchy. He was taking a stand for compassion and wholeness and reconciliation and peace. Now, what this means for us as a congregation is important. It means that, yes, we focus on the interior spiritual life, but it also means that it's important for us to speak out. Here in Grand Junction, here in Colorado, and here in the national conversation on issues of justice and equality and equity. It means being willing to write letters to Congress, write letters to the newspaper. You know, if you write a letter to the newspaper, it not only gets published here, but congresspeople, senators, read those too and take note. It means standing on street corners and looking like a fool in an effort to draw attention to the inequities and the injustices in our midst. Sometimes speaking up is not comfortable. It's difficult. And yet, to fully enact our compassion, I would suggest that that's what we are called to do. There's a school meeting, a board meeting Tuesday. I'm really impressed by the work that the safety committee of the school board has done in looking at the issue of guns on campus and school security. It sounds like they've done a pretty thorough job. And yet, the gun advocates will be there Tuesday. How many peace advocates will be there? We talk of being a people of compassion and understanding. Compassion isn't just feeling something deeply. If it isn't translated into concrete expression in the real world, it doesn't mean much. The widow, the orphan, the homeless, the sick, the sojourner. These are still the ones who lack a voice in our community and world. And they will continue to lack a voice. If we, the ones with the resources, the one with the voices, the ones with the abilities, refuse to stand in